All right. As Kyla said, my name is Nancy Popa. I'm the current president of the Lake Leelanau Lake Association, and there's my contact information if you have any follow-up questions. So I thought I would just give a little introduction, a little background on Lake Leelanau. It's a rather large lake. It's 21 miles long, and probably the most challenging aspect from an invasive species perspective is that there are 14 public access points. At this point in time, we have 4 cleaning stations installed that, of course, I will talk about. A few other things, about 39% of riparians are members of our lake association. Um, Also, we identified Eurasian Watermilfoil in our lake in 2019, and we immediately formed a partnership with the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians and have been working side by side since the beginning to help control Eurasian Watermilfoil and also to build out the boat wash stations. So we consider them our close partner. So today I'll talk a little bit about design, permitting, timing, construction management, cost, and maintenance. And then, as Kyla said, there will be questions and answers at the end. So we'll start with siting. Most lakes don't have 14 access points. So we had to start by looking at all 14 of them and deciding which were the busiest ones and where did it make most sense, even logistically, because the lake's so long, to put in boat wash stations. And so we did that by talking to fishermen and driving around, looking at the condition of them, looking how deep the water was. And we basically ranked the 14 boat access points from most in need of a boat wash station to least. And as it turns out, no surprise, the 3 DNR boat launches were the busiest boat launches on the lake. They had the biggest parking lots. We also counted the number of parking spaces because that's an indication of how busy they are. And so we focused on those, but we didn't have a boat wash station on the north end of the lake. And so we also pursued a township property on the north side of the lake and started working to develop that. So, like I said, almost all access points are either state-owned or township-owned, so you know who your stakeholders are right off the bat. The very first thing we look at is traffic flow. What one question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to wash the boats on the way out or the way in, or even most preferably, can you locate the boat wash station in a place that you can catch them going both directions? And so I'll just walk you through this little diagram over here on the right. This is the Bingham Boat Launch. It's a DNR access point, the biggest boat launch on our lake. I can't remember how many parking spaces there are, like 35, plus they park all the way up the road, so it's very busy. And down at the lower end of the diagram in the dark gray, you see that's where we chose to put our boat wash station. And they take up a fair amount of space. That area in gray is 70 feet long by 20 feet wide, because you really need room for like these extra long trucks pulling extra long pontoon boats to be able to swing in there and get out of traffic. I'll talk a little bit more about siting as far as having the best place to discharge the wash water. So I'll get back to that. Let's see. So a little bit on the water discharge. You are not allowed to discharge water to the ground and allow it to flow to surface water. And so both wetlands are considered surface water and the lake, and most boat launches are located smack dab between the lake and the wetlands. And so it can be really challenging. So one of the things that we did in our design was we made the parking pad, the 70 by 20 area, particularly permeable so that there was no chance water running off it and getting into the surface water. So I think we had 4 inches of very permeable material put down. So we had to excavate it out and put new material in there just so that we weren't violating the Michigan law about discharge to surface water. Wetlands is another challenge, as I already said, and I'll talk a little bit later about what it takes to get a wetlands permit. On this particular property, the straight line at the very bottom is the property line. And so we had setbacks that we had to meet just by, cleared it by an inch. But just to the right side of that pad is all wetlands. So it is a real challenge to find a spot for these things to go. As far as zoning goes, I would start with a talk with your zoning administrator. Or if you're so inclined, you can read your zoning ordinance. Oftentimes, you'll find that boat wash stations are located, or boat launches are located in residential areas because oftentimes the property surrounding the lake is zoned residential. And what we found is in some of our townships, there's 6 townships that surround Lake Leelanau, so different regulations in every township. In some townships, it was a permit by use, which meant we didn't have to get a zoning permit. And in other townships, we had to get a special use permit to site the boat wash station. So it's a little confusing. So I would start talking with your zoning administrator. One thing also on the zoning front is we have quite a bit of signage talking about to stop, wash your boat, what the hours of operation are. And you have to add up all the square footage of that signage and make sure it meets your zoning ordinance. So there's restrictions on that. Utilities are another consideration. Optimally, you'd want to site your boat wash station as close to an electric transformer as possible because you're going to have to likely bring electricity into the site. And if you have to bring the electricity thousands and thousands of feet, the costs can really add up. So it's another consideration when you're siting. Okay, a few more things about siting. You really need your local government support. And the big colorful picture is a boat wash station that we pursued. And they already had kind of a master plan for the park surrounding this river that feeds the lake. And it's kind of difficult to see, but outside of that orange area, there's a little yellow shaded area where we proposed a boat wash station. And the truth was that particular township really didn't have any appetite for having somebody else's equipment on their township park. And it didn't go forward. So we looked elsewhere. The other diagram is another DNR launch that's not on our lake, but it's on a river. And it was very tiny. And so the only way that we could design it so that there was good traffic flow was to expand the pavement area and add a new driveway for exit. And by doing that, we were kind of chewing into this beloved township park that's the green area just to the right of the yellow lines. And the Lake Association really just didn't want to be the people that were going to chew into a park. And so this was another project that was abandoned. So there is a lot of stakeholder engagement just to figure out what makes sense for your community. So these days, there's a couple of technology selections to pick from. You may have all have heard of the CD3, which is a high pressure air, wet dry vacuum. We call it a kiosk. It's a self-contained unit. It has really great graphics on it, very visible. It's very educational. And this comes with the one that we bought comes with a solar panel. And so the real advantage, one of the advantages of the CD3 is that you don't need water or electricity. Uh, it's easy to maintain. You basically just turn it off at the end of the season. There is a container that collects water that people have sucked out of their live well, and that needs to be emptied at the end of the season. What is kind of interesting is this simple design actually costs the exact same amount as a high pressure cold water system. So there really isn't a cost savings with the CD3, but it's very, very easy to develop. And we actually moved this. So we had it at one site, and then we really wanted a high pressure wash at that site. So we got somebody with a forklift and moved it 20 miles up the road. So there's a lot of flexibility with it. The reason that we pursued the high pressure cold water system over more CD3 systems, because this was our first boat wash station, was that we feel like there's a great deal of personal satisfaction in spraying your boat with water versus spraying it with air. I know there's some recent studies showing that the CD3 is as effective as high pressure water, but if you watch people clean their boats with air, they kind of just wave the wand all over. And if they can see the water coming out of the nozzle, they tend to be a little bit more careful about getting every surface area. And that's our perspective on CD3 versus a high pressure cold water. So we didn't go the hot water route. And the reason was, well, it adds complexity and it adds cost. But the real reason that we didn't go that way is all the studies that we had read shows that the hot water needs sufficient residence time to kill aquatic organisms. And when somebody's washing off their boat, we just weren't sure that the hot water was actually impinging upon aquatic invasive species for the 15 seconds necessary to kill it. And so we thought that we would just make things a little simpler and go to the high pressure cold water system. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the design of the high pressure uh, cold water system. You see, we have a little 8x8 shed. We had that built by the Amish. It's a little sturdier than one that you might get from Lowe's or Home Depot. It's got 3/4 inch plywood and 2x4s. And they delivered it right to our site. And one advantage of 8x8 is it's typically exempt from a building code permit. So, and everything fits in there with plenty of room. So you can see the inside of the shed. The equipment's not very big. On the very right side, that is the pressure tank that comes from the well. And the well installer puts that in. And then we decided to put in a water filter system. Whoops, I'm sorry. How do I shrink that? Oh boy. There we go. We put in this water filter system just because we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to plug the nozzle on the wand. This small piece of equipment right here is actually the high pressure pump. And here's the lid that normally sets on top of it. It's about 20 inches by 28 inches. It's not very big. And what you don't see here is after this picture was taken, we have an electrical panel and a relay switching panel because we have some interlocks so that the water doesn't run excessively if somebody's fooling around, or we actually turn it off during the night when no one's there, just to prevent anybody from washing their truck or something like that, which is not allowed by our permit. Then you see we also have a commercial quality retractable hose reel on a post. And of course, that's where the wand is. And this is just a little cover we put on it. And it's one of those things you put around your basement windows to keep the soil out. As far as utilities, most launch sites do not have electricity or water, and so we had to install both of those things. And then, of course, if you decide to go the hot water method, you would need both a heater and a fuel source. Okay, so I failed to mention that my husband and I were like the boat wash power couple. I did the development on getting, the stakeholders, the permits, the bids, and my husband oversaw the design and the construction. And so he's very detail oriented, as you see. And this little design drawing has enough information on it that you could print it off and build your own boat wash station. So there's a lot of specifications here. So I think you'll find it very useful. Okay, so the list of permits is long, but don't be daunted by that. They're all one-page permits for the most part, not too hard to get. But you have to start with, of course, an agreement with the property owner. And so we have one boat wash station at a township for which we have no written agreement with the township. We're just partnering with them and we keep them apprised of our activities. And then we do have an agreement with the DNR. It's very detailed. It's 13 pages long. I suspect it's a standard agreement for anybody using state land, is my guess. In it, there are ongoing reports. There's requirements for approvals before you host events on site, things like that. And there are pretty significant requirements for liability insurance to hold the state harmless from anything that could go wrong with the boat wash station. Another thing that is kind of a surprise is most boat access points do not have an address assigned to them because only buildings have addresses. So it's one of the first things you have to do. It's one-page county form because you really need the address for all the future permits that you have to get. So second on the list is work with your zoning administrator. Like I said, only one of our 4 units actually needed a zoning permit, so it really depends on what's in your ordinance. Well permit, in our case, we put in a non-potable well, which is the same as any other well, except for it doesn't have to have ongoing water testing for safety, because we have an outside spigot that is available to the public, and we wouldn't want anyone to drink the water because we haven't tested it for safety. So it might be something you want to think about is a non-potable well permit. Soil erosion, of course, in Michigan, if you're within, I believe it's 100 feet of water, you have to have a soil erosion permit before you move any soil. We did not require a building permit, but it's something that you have to check with your own county on. Electrical permit, obviously we had a lot of electrical work done inside of that. Uh, and usually your electrical contractor will get that for you, and it's just a quick 1 day turnaround on that. One of our sites, we did have to get a wetland permit, and it took a long time. I think it may have taken us 6 months to get that wetland permit. And because of the site layout, we just had to chew into something like 0.017 acres of wetland. But we had to provide alternative analysis and in mitigation. We chose to add mitigation to our permit application, and what we did was planted 2 flats of native wetland plants around the area that our boat wash station was in. And letters of support. So if you are building on somebody else's property, pretty much every application wants a letter from the property owner saying that you are authorized to do that. You may also want just a letter of support so that if you're trying to convince somebody it's a good idea, it's nice to have a letter from the DNR saying that that they not only approve of you building that boat wash station, but they're in support of it. And then lastly, the groundwater discharge permit exemption is something that is a little bit more detailed. I think I have it on the next slide. Yes. So as I mentioned, it's illegal to discharge water to the ground without a permit. And when we started developing these stations, we looked at collecting the water in underground tanks. And what we found is they really needed to be sized for rainwater collection also. And you couldn't pump them without chemical analysis. And it all of a sudden became a very complex operation for a lake association to handle. And so we looked at the groundwater permit rules, the Water Resource Division rules, and there were a lot of exemptions in there for things that you'd really be surprised at, like, for instance, the drains from parking structures that are, full of salt and everything. That's exempt from a groundwater permit. And so the Lake Association made a case of exempting wash water from boat wash stations. And that case was sent to pretty much every leadership position in the Water Resource Division. And it was radio silence for about 3 months. And when we inquired about the status of our request, they said they're still thinking about it. And so it was about 6 months later that we had a meeting with the Water Resource Division, and they agreed to issue the very first groundwater permit exemption for boat wash station water. And what was really important is that the station was sited in the optimal place for groundwater discharge. So, we had all those other criteria about, traffic flow and proximity to utility lines. But this might have been the biggest hurdle. And so we had to identify all the drinking wells within, I think, a half mile or 3/4 of a mile away. And we had to identify the wetlands and the surface water. And we basically put that boat wash station in the place that served our purpose in such a fashion that we were as far away from those things as possible. And of course, we had to make the case for the benefits of the boat wash station. And I have shared our application with many lake associations already. It's not rocket science, but the way that you get an exemption is you go to the My Enviro portal. And I frankly can't remember how to navigate it, but your local Eagle representative can help you figure out how to get to the page where you file for the permit exemption. So as far as timing goes, I won't walk through this all, but you can see, especially the property agreement with the DNR, most of the wait time on that was the director of the DNR needs to sign it. And so it actually sat on that person's desk for quite a while. But you can tell that best case scenario, it takes about 15 months to develop a boat wash station. And once you get all the permits in place, it doesn't take very long to set the building down, have the pressure tank put in there, have the pump put in there, put in the big posts for the spray wand. It doesn't take that much. I will tell you though, small jobs like this, we waited a long time for the electrician and the excavation. So maybe you have an in with those kind of people. So from a construction management perspective, I think your cost will double if you hire out construction management. And your best bet is put together your own team. Maybe someone that can do the permits, the agreements, the bids. Somebody that has some experience in building can do construction oversight. And then find a team of volunteers to, there's quite a bit of manual work, putting up the signs, the posts. My husband did the plumbing. We didn't hire that out. It was pretty simple. So that's my recommendation. So here's the bottom line. All 4 of our boat wash stations came in at right around 38,000. Some of them had a little bit more cost on excavation. Some had a little bit more on the well, but pretty much they all came in at the same place. We did not find any grants from the federal, state, or local government. But as I mentioned, we did partner with the Grand Traverse Band, and they actually have contributed substantially to our boat wash station development. I will say that pretty much half of our electrical and a good portion of our excavation, we got discounted rates because of the public benefits we were providing. So make sure you ask. And as far as ongoing cost, our liability insurance is $3,500 a year. That's for 4 stations. Replacement equipment, so far we really haven't had much. We had damage to the CD3, so we had to repair the solar panels. And believe it or not, we think a boom truck hit it. We don't know how. And we are staffing our boat wash stations Thursday through Sunday, and we pay 20 to 25 per hour. And that adds up, but we think it's really important. And then we have volunteers that we try and staff the boat wash stations at the busier hours on the other days of the week. Our utilities are $35 a month per station, and most of that is just like a distribution charge. So it's year round. We don't use that much electricity. Maintenance is kind of minimal. We have to isolate the wells in the winter. And so we have to, turn everything on, get the well running, bring the power back, flush the lines. Opposite is true in the winter. And of course, we monitor the pumps for hours of operation, so we know when to change the oil and that type of thing. Don't forget to create like manuals because you may not always have the same people doing it, and you want to make sure that all this investment doesn't get hurt by, bad maintenance practices. So I finished a little early. I hope I didn't talk too fast. I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This was great. Like, what a way to walk through the step-by-step of getting those boat wash stations up and running. At this time, I'd like to invite people to unmute to ask your questions. Otherwise, throw them in the chat and I will read those aloud for Nancy to answer.
Hi, Nancy. Dan DeLomo from Long Lake. How are you?
Good, Dan.
Hey, wonderful talk. Very comprehensive. Thank you. Just one question on your timeline. You said about 15 months. I presume that's more for the power wash water-based system. How
Yes.
long would it have taken for the CD3 installation? What kind of timeline?
I would say if you had your site prepared, the CD3 delivery was maybe 3, 4 weeks. So not long at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Nancy, hi, it's Dave Baker, Long Lake Association.
Hi, Dave.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
My question, do you do any tracking of usage? In other words, do people balk and avoid the site? Can you tell? What's the usage rate?
Yeah, darn it. I didn't brief myself on all the stats, but whenever we have a volunteer or an employee at the boat wash station, we track all of our interactions. And I can tell you just kind of anecdotally that 99% of the people that we talk to are very glad that we're there doing it. They're open-minded and that type of thing. Then we also ask them if they've been in another lake prior or if their boat has been out of the water for more than 2 weeks. And anybody that needs a boat wash, I believe that we have a very high level, somewhere in the 90% level of people that need to have their boat wash have it boat washed. So if the need is there, they're getting their boat washed. But actually, if you want more accurate numbers, I'd be happy to share them with you via email.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm also happy to answer questions about the boat wash station. I was fortunate enough to work with the Lake Leelanau Lake Association volunteers and staff this summer as they were figuring out their program and how they were going to do that outreach. So also happy to talk about that.
Yeah, actually, Kyla, if you have better numbers than what I shared, please share them.
I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but yeah, you are right on the mark there about when in terms of people who really are what we consider high risk for transporting an aquatic invasive species into Lake Leelanau, we have very few refusals. And for context, for people who are joining us outside of Michigan, because there are a few of them, Michigan law for aquatic invasive species does not require, I mean, it says that your boat's supposed to be clean before you come to the launch, but as a lake association, the lake association doesn't have any enforcement power. So we're really just, their staff, their volunteers are just there educating the public, demonstrating how the equipment can be used and kind of informing them on the importance of those clean, drain, dry behaviors. There's a question in the chat. Did you consider solar for electrification? I appreciate might require more land and probably battery backup for cloudy days.
We did not consider that. The truth is just, we're primarily a volunteer organization and we just wanted to keep things simple. And I do think land would be an issue just because of my previous comment about boat launch access sites not being roomy places.
Another question in the chat. How has your associated townships participated with the installation and operation of your boat washes?
Mhm. So our townships really haven't participated. The one township agreed to let us put the CD3 on their property. And I mentioned we had liability insurance to protect the state. We also have liability insurance to protect the township. I think in general, the community is very, very appreciative for all that we're doing, but there is no real participation on the township level.
Nancy Dan DeLomo again. How did you get personnel, let's say? I mean, you and your husband are, sounds like, the king and queen of boat wash, but you obviously need this additional assistant. Did you go through your lake association, or did you just have people in mind when you started this?
To do the construction, or like you're talking about the manning of the station during the
Well,
summer?
so, obviously initially for construction, I suppose that might be a little easier because that's a one-time thing. But when it
Yeah.
comes to manning, staffing,
hmm
maintenance,
hmm
you must have a little core of people that you rely on.
Yeah, so this year we actually just rolled out a big volunteer program. And, it went out in our newsletter, and people could fill out a form and, where their interest was, because, we have a lot of opportunities. And then the person leading that team, like the boat wash station prevention team, would reach out to that volunteer, and they put together a very in-depth training program for the volunteers and the employees, so that they were well prepared to talk to people. And so that from an employee standpoint, we advertised locally and on Indeed. Some of our employees were local, and some were people that came here to work at the boat wash station. So it's a big effort to find people, but all came from the Lake Association looking for them. And as far as the construction goes, um, you know, uh, my husband and myself did most of the work. We had a couple of other people, Dan Mays from the Grand Traverse Band and Lonnie Rodemaker, also from the Lake Association, were the guys that kind of did the physical stuff, like the digging of the poles and making sure the shed got put in the right place and that kind of thing.
Wow, let me see your biceps. Good job. Thank you.
hmm
There was another question in the chat. Are you aware if there is a non-toxic colorant that could be added to a CD3 pressurized airstream that would make users see their impact?
That's really interesting. I am not aware of that, but it might be a great question for the CD3 team.
There were a few questions that were submitted beforehand as well. I will go through some of those. We talked about enforcement a little bit, and again, I'm happy to answer any more questions people might have on that front. Yeah, you talked a little bit about ongoing maintenance. Did you have any like agreements, or are you doing that maintenance all internally with the Lake Association?
The Lake Association is doing all of the maintenance. I will tell you, we do have an agreement with the Grand Traverse Band because two of the boat wash stations, uh, a large portion of the cost was granted by the Grand Traverse Band to the Lake Association. And so we do have an agreement with them that says that we will have insurance on them, and we will operate and maintain them. And we have those same requirements with the DNR. So we are contractually obligated to keep them going. Any other questions?
Well, then, Nancy, would you mind switching to that next slide for me?
Sure.
Thank you, everyone who joined us today. We have 2 more invasive species webinars scheduled for this year, or this winter, I should say. We have next week, Art and Aquatic Invasive Species with the artist, paper sculptor, Linda Hamilton. She'll be talking about how she uses art to communicate about invasive species, raise awareness, and help with identification. And then in February, we have a webinar with Dr. Jordan Stoll from Michigan Trout Unlimited talking about the invasive species Didymo and what we can all do to help prevent its spread through northern Michigan. So please mark your calendar with those dates, and feel free to sign up at the Benzie Conservation District's website. I will be sending a follow-up email to this webinar with a link to the recording on our YouTube page, as well as a copy of Nancy's slides, and any other resources that come out that we think that you would all like to see based off of this talk. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.